Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Sonia Sutherland from Richmont Graduate University, and I'd like to welcome you to the second of 5 events within the Panel of Diverse Faculty series, fostering helpful conversations around diversity in higher education. Our topic today is entitled Diverse Students, Engaging in Difficult Dialogue for Understanding Myself and Diverse Others. And so talking about race can be awkward and uncomfortable, whether we're talking with people who are from different walks of life or whether we're talking to people who look just like us. However, it is necessary and it is possible. And the fact is that racism does exist and racial conflict exists and inequality still exists. I've spoken with so many people who agree that we need to have conversations about race, yet still they and many others are reluctant to talk to people inside and outside of their own group. And they feel awkward and uncomfortable or afraid of saying the wrong things to those who are different, or of being ridiculed and ostracized by those who are part of their own family or social circles. And so the students and early postmaster's grads that we have joining us today realize the importance of starting this conversation, and they will share about their unique experiences and perspectives, as well as their fears and hopes for the future. You will hear primarily from them, and they will share their thoughts about how students from all cultural and racial backgrounds can move through fear and develop a willingness to sit in the uncomfortable spaces that will lead to increased conversation, greater understanding, and a collaborative fight for social justice. We anticipate fully that their perspectives will simultaneously be helpful for us who are counselor educators and administrators or therapists in the field for informing our understanding of diverse students and how some of these perspectives may influence how things play out in our classrooms, how they play out one-on-one in our interactions, and then certainly within the university and our larger communities. So Dr. Sean Smith is going to take over from here.
Thank you, Dr. Sutherland, and I appreciate your collaboration and leadership in these series. And good afternoon and good morning to all of you, to each of you, wherever you may be coming from. Again, we want to welcome you to this exciting panel of diverse students and faculty to really speak to their experiences. I am Dr. Sean Smith. I am a faculty member at North Carolina A&T State University, where I sit on the faculty in the Department of Counseling. I am also a past president of the Association for Multicultural Counseling and Development, and I'm just excited to be here today. Happy New Year to everyone, and I do hope everyone's holidays were safe. You were able to relax, and as we excitedly pushed out 2020, we have just as much excitement and enthusiasm as we roll in 2021. Without further ado, what I'd like to do is move forward and introduce, or I should say, invite our panel to introduce themselves to each of you. And with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and begin with Miss Sophia. Sophia.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Smith. It is the morning here in Portland, Oregon, 9 o'clock. I'm happy to see all of you. My name is Sophia Jasani. I am a recent graduate with my master's in clinical rehabilitation counseling, just graduated in June 2020, and I'm currently a therapist in private practice and adjunct faculty at Portland State University, which is my alma mater. I serve as the secretary of the Oregon Counseling Association and am the president of the Oregon Association for Multicultural Counseling and Development. You can see some of the identities that I walk into the room with are that I'm a non-Black woman of color. You might not be able to see, but it feels like an important identity to me that I'm a proud daughter of Muslim immigrants from India and Tanzania. I'm a cis woman, I'm married, I'm currently able-bodied, currently in a smaller body, and I'm a first-generation college student.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, thank you. And then Miss Adrian, if you could introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Adrian Torrance. I am currently a student at Richmont Graduate University, surviving my final year through internship. Thank God. And yeah, hopeful for what the future for me holds after graduation. My unique intersections are that I am Black, I am a female, and I also identify as gay.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Mr. Cameron.
Hello, Dr. Smith and everyone else. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm Cameron Walker. I am a second-year student at Richmont University. This is a bit of a second half of life journey for me, as I'm in my early 40s, and I've worked on staff at a local church for the last 20 years. And I've felt this call to learn more about helping relationships and counseling, and Richmont has been an amazing place of growth and an intersection of faith and current practices that have been very life-giving for me. I am married, just celebrated my 20th anniversary in November, being married. We have 3 children. I officially am the father of a teenager. I don't know how that happened so quickly, and it is what everyone said it would be. It is like whiplash, and we are learning and growing every day. So I am a white male, cisgender male, and this, the last couple of years has been a remarkable journey for me, understanding my intersecting identities, and especially my whiteness. And excited to be a part of a program where I can learn and grow and share part of my experience along the way.
Thank you, Mr. Cameron. Dr. Nelson.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm also in Portland, Oregon, or just outside of Portland, Oregon, so it's morning for me as well. I am a faculty at George Fox University. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Clinical Psychology, actually. I've been there in my second year there, so I'm a early career in education. And I identify as a Black female. However, I'm biracial. I'm half Italian, half Black. And I hold both of those identities really, really closely to me. However, I walk through the world as a Black woman. And I am, like I said, I'm an associate or assistant professor, and I'm the associate director of diversity, equity, and inclusion in our department. And I'm really excited to just have this conversation with everyone today.
Excellent, excellent. Dr. Macklin.
Good afternoon, everyone, and it is afternoon for me. Coming after Dr. Amber, it's kind of, I almost said good morning. I am Dr. Vicki Macklin. I am the Associate Director of our counseling program at Gordon Conwell in Charlotte, and I am also an adjunct faculty here in the counseling program, and Rain from the Midwest, so I have learned to adjust to many different time zones, having lived in many different time zones. And I too am excited to join this conversation. Was pleased to have been invited by Dr. Sutherland just to engage in these conversations, and look forward to engaging and especially hearing from our students that represent on this panel. in this conversation, about diverse conversations that our students are engaging with and walking through. So.
Thank you, thank you. And Dr. Sutherland.
So I am an associate professor at Richmont Graduate University and the Dean of Assessment Planning and Accreditation, and also serve as the director of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion for the university. I am a Brooklyn girl, but my heritage is Cuban and Jamaican, and I'm the daughter of Cuban Jamaican immigrants. I identify as a cisgender Black female, and I have two daughters, 27 and 29. I always have to check that. And single as well. And so that also plays into, obviously, a lot of my perspective. So that's a little bit about me.
All right, excellent, excellent. And I identify as being a Black male, a Christian, a cisgender. My pronouns are he, his, and him. I was born in Pennsylvania, but raised South. All of my family are from Kentucky, South Carolina, Alabama. I'm also a veteran. I was in the military for 15 years as a combat medic, primarily in the Middle East, Africa, and South and Central America. I too am blessed at this point in time to be able-bodied and able-mind, and I am also a father of 3 blessings that are 23, 25, and in a week and a half, 26. So let's lean in and move forward. So our first question today is, how do you understand your intersecting identities and how they impact how you see and understand what's been happening around you in 2020 and or throughout your life, your interpersonal interactions with people who are racially or culturally different from you, and the way you navigate, interact with systems, all right? So I'll go ahead and repeat that one more time. How do you understand your intersecting identities and how they impact how you see and understand what's been happening around you in 2020 and or throughout your life, your interpersonal interactions with people who are racially or culturally different from you, and the way you navigate or interact with these systems. Sophia, did you want to start?
Oh, well, I think the biggest beginning in 2020, the movement for Black Lives has swept our nation and touched, it's just expanded and touched so many more people, especially here in Portland, Oregon. The collective grief around the state-sponsored violence against Black bodies has been felt in a way that has brought a lot of people together and also inspired a lot of conflict. In Portland in particular, it's really erupted into conflict between protesters and the police. So while all of this is going on, we've also been experiencing the pandemic. And so I've noticed in myself a desire to connect, have affinity spaces with other people of color as a comfort, as solidarity, as like shared mutual understanding and support. However, we've been so isolated because of quarantine. So kind of navigating all of this collective grief with also this expanding push towards action has like inspired so much creativity in the ways that we show up, I think. Even the ways that we introduce ourselves and speak. Like a year ago, were we all introducing ourselves with our salient identities? This is like, I think this is new that it's becoming so universal because it's really raised in our awareness how it was kind of like the elephant in the room. We can all see how we interact in the world, and now we're naming it, and hopefully digging below the surface. It's not just kind of platitudes of like getting good at performing wokeness, you know, and being able to name the things, but really having the humility and the courage to like process, oh, what does it mean, and how, like, and what do we do with that information?
You know, I totally, I agree with Sophia. I think as a Black woman navigating this year, and as a young professional, there's so many pieces that really impacted how I understood myself in the world. I also just moved back to Oregon from being in Baltimore the last 4 years on the East Coast. I grew up in this area. I grew up in a small rural community, so I'm used to being in Oregon and used to being in a predominantly white space. But then I was in Baltimore in a predominantly Black space and understood myself had a whole new light that I had never understood before. Understanding my Blackness from a white lens of how I grew up, and then being in a Black space and being able to experience it without the predominant eyes being white, and experiencing that liberation, right? And then coming back into this space of being in a predominantly white state, city, institution, and then 2020 happening was just a really interesting shift of perspective of how do I navigate this space again? And even coming in, having to ask those questions of how do I navigate this space now, having experienced this new sense of liberation in my identity as a Black woman in a predominantly white space, how do I walk this? And then having this highlight of the Black Lives Matter movement and everything that's going on, and particularly here in Portland, that the conversation and the highlight of my identity is so ever present. And there's this tension for me personally of how, again, asking those questions of how do I navigate this? Because for us here in Portland, Oregon, there's so few people of color that people were wanting to have these conversations and wanting to engage in this new way, and having so many questions. And this is something that I really care about, conversations that I've always engaged in, but you know, it looked really different. And now everybody is wanting to have this conversation, and also asking me to have this conversation with them and expecting me to have this conversation with them, and finding this place of like, how do I care for myself and also meet the needs of the institution, the systems that I'm part of, come alongside my community that is in need of education, training, facilitating conversations, and kind of being thrust into a position of you know, expert, or at least somebody to facilitate these things, because people were just at such a loss of how do I do this? How do I have this conversation? What is happening? I don't even know these words. I didn't even realize this was a problem. And now it's, oh my gosh, it's a problem and we gotta talk about it, but we don't even know where to start. And I thought I was a good person, but maybe I'm not. And all of the stuff never bothered me before. It's not like I didn't know these things were happening. I've seen it on the TV before. I've heard it on the news before. And how come it's just now bothering me? How come I wasn't impacted like this before? And having and sitting with those questions with people. And so again, that for me, as I look at my intersecting identities as, again, an early career professional, Black woman just moving back and already trying to navigate my newfound liberation in my sense of identity in this space, and in this extra level of expectation and conversation, and needing to also hold myself, because I was also grieving and impacted by all of this so much. What does it mean for me to care for myself and hold and be able to grieve and understand what's going on, and also meet the needs of my community and everybody around me? It was a really interesting, again, intersection of all of those pieces in 2020 in particular.
Thank you. Yes, so what you're sharing, I think, is a nice, for lack of better terms, package of 2020 and everything, right? It's like everything.
Yeah, I like felt your response like in my body, because I think you just expressed a lot of what my 2020 felt like as well. I think so many like conflicting emotions that I was experiencing, you know, encouragement and excitement for the movement, for the shift, seeing friends kind of waking up to things, confronting stuff that maybe they're confronting for the first time in their lives, was such a beautiful thing. You know, going out with, you know, a lot of my white friends and them recognizing I'm the only brown person in the space, which they never recognized before. Just like getting to witness people waking up was really powerful, but it also came with exhaustion. It also came with being overwhelmed. It also came with, for me, a lot of frustration, because at the same time I was encountering, you know, white fragility and people who were, you know, putting up even more walls than maybe they had before. And like you're saying, being that token person expected to kind of speak for the whole community, when truly, you know, I think I am just realizing how complex the Black experience even is, and how we are so nuanced and so beautiful in so many different ways, and trying to help people kind of like understand that as they're just starting out it's tough. Like it's been really challenging for me as well, and I do operate in a lot of white spaces, like not only at school, but, you know, roommates, friends. I went to a PWI for undergrad. Like it's not anything new for me. So I think trying to protect my energy and find like that rest, know when to speak and when to kind of maybe push someone to do their own education, form their own group, start having dialogues there. It's just something I'm constantly confronting and trying to figure out as well.
Thank you all for sharing your experience. For me, 2020 has been a personal reckoning, really, in my own journey of understanding all of my intersecting identities. And as a white, upper middle class, cisgender Christian male, I'm learning that for the majority of my life, I've been the poster child of ignorance and unconscious complicity in benefiting from a very broken system, and did not know that. And though I was fortunate enough a few years back to work on staff at a church with a Black pastor who lived through the civil rights and rode to school every day on the back of the bus. And I will go to my grave cherishing the conversations of hours on end of sitting with him and listening and learning of his experience. And I feel it was such a gift to me to see and better understand his experience. But in the last 2 to 3 years has really been a real eye-opening, and I can only say like a personal reckoning to understanding my own sense of privilege, and how I have personally and have been so blinded and unaware to how much I have personally benefited from a very broken system. And personally, that has left me vacillating sometimes on a razor's edge, from feeling very empowered to feeling very insecure. And at times I I feel very empowered to learn and to grow and to just listen and put myself in uncomfortable situations. And then when I get there, I tend to feel very insecure of all the things that have been named. Every day I feel like I'm learning just how much I don't know. And I carry with me a constant sense of saying the wrong thing or inadvertently, just imposing more harm or damage into this delicate ecosystem that we all find ourselves in. But as a how do I see this in 2020? I really see this as a righting of deep injustices. And Adrian, as you mentioned this, never have you experienced so many people who are now so aware of, and I think, as a Christian pastor, there's a scripture in the book of Romans that the Apostle Paul says the earth is groaning for the sons and daughters of God to be revealed. And I think throughout the ages, that groaning is at different levels. But in 2020, it has been a deafening groan, like from the bowels of the earth, that is just saying no more. There must be a shaking, a righting of deep, deep wrongs. And even back to the early story of Cain and Abel, like the injustice cries out, the earth cries out. And I have heard that, and I can attest that many other white male suburbanites are hearing it too and wrestling with what is our role and what is our place in this.
I'm realizing even as I sat and listened to the responses, and my reply comes from I think it was the third. I'm so glad you put those up. The third question that you put up there, third response, I think you said your interpersonal interactions with people who are racially or culturally different from you. And it comes from this place of being in a different generation, even from the four of you, having grown up. I may not look like it, but many years older than the four of you. And gosh, not just that, but also being in Amber, Dr. Nelson and I being in this position of being faculty, but having to maneuver through life in this season has been just this process for me, has been that question, how your interpersonal interactions with people who are racially or culturally different from you, and both in my work environment and in my personal life, maneuvering through that and needing that space. I really appreciate, I think it was something that Adrian said, really appreciated needing personal space and time to do that, needing to pull away, needing place to grieve, needing time to grieve, needing a space to say, I don't have the energy, nor do I want to try to feel like I need to explain, to have the energy to offer, to say, this is why I feel what I feel, because of the deep, as Cameron said, the deep wounding that the earth has gone through, that I have gone through in all these years of seeing the pain, of experiencing the pain, and being able to say, yeah, the earth has been crying out for a long time, and there's been many years that this woman has gone through of seeing woundedness. And so interpersonally, this journey is still on for me. And I'm so grateful for the younger generation, for these men and women that we have on this panel, of being able to see change happen for them, and knowing that there's still this place for folks in my generation that we're still journeying through this, and giving space. And that's what I'd want to say for those in the younger generation, to continue to give space and time for those in the older generation to say, yeah, that journey is still on for them. There's still some places of wounding that needs to happen in the healing process, and to allow that space and time to happen for them. That healing can and will take place, and to allow that to happen. So that's all I wanted to say.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, the next question is specifically targeted for our students on the panel. And that question is this: what steps can students like you take to clarify how they want to respond, and what that could uniquely look like for them? All right, I'll restate that. What steps can students like you take to clarify how they want to respond, and what that could uniquely look like for them? Let's start with Miss Adrian this time around.
I mean, being at Richmont, I've had the opportunity to be a part of, minority tables that we have, or multicultural, I guess, kind of groups that flesh out what change we want to see at the institution that we're at. And I think that has been a really powerful space. And I think people seeking out opportunities to participate in things like that can be something that can happen immediately. I personally I think starting small and building relational equity with people that are completely different from you, have different experiences, different intersections, look differently, all of that, I think that's where you begin. And I always am advocating for that. So a lot of times telling my friends, like, hey, look at your Instagram feed, and, are the people you're posting, does everyone look like you? Examine your circle. Who do you share meals with? Who are you even, like, who do you go to church with? What is the church congregation reflective of? Like, just so many questions like that kind of make individuals examine, like, oh, wow, I am in a bubble right now, and I'm not really even hearing from people who have different experiences. And I'm like, how do you go to something further down the road when this is like what you're living in right now? So for me, I'm always gonna say starting there is very, very important.
Thank you. Mr. Cameron.
I think, well, first I want to, agree with Adrian. I have found the experience at Richmont University specifically to be so intentional in every single class I've been in, to approach the topic of racial diversity and inclusion in such a respectful way. And that in and of itself has felt very empowering to me, to see it modeled by the faculty across the board in so many classes. But, you know, for me, just speaking, I think for people who look a lot like privilege, and that it's very important to me that that I feel like people, particularly of any other race or ethnicity, is being really honest with me about their experience, and not just sort of you know, patronizing me and my journey of wokeness, but like I really want to, and sometimes I have felt like, you know, we got to put our kid gloves on to talk to the white guy. He might, you know, he's fragile. and I get that, because so many, even in my family, are. But there are so many, but you know, I'm blessed to have so many friends that are deeply hungry to not in a sense of like knowledge of like, oh, I just want to understand more about this relevant topic. But I've been complicit in this, and I want to be transformed. I want to change from the inside out. And I'm looking for real and honest expressions of people's experience. So.
Thank you. Ms. Sophia?
Thank you. Adrian, yes, when you were talking about reflecting on like a person-to-person human level, what our surroundings are like, I absolutely 100%, I always tell people, like I always have a long list of like social media, who you should be following, what you should be reading, where to get your information. That's so important. And it really speaks to the necessity for, as students in counselor education, our learning needs to continue outside of the classroom, right? We're full humans 24/7, not just when we're in the classroom. And so that's really important on that human level. I wanted to like cheer. Yes. However, as students, we are spending a lot of time in the classroom, and our content is really personal and really emotional. We're spending years reflecting on our family dynamics and the systems that we live in, and we're talking about these things and we're studying them. And for some folks who experience lots of privilege, and I totally appreciate, Cameron, so much how you're kind of like naming the ways that you've woken up to your privilege and your desire for transformation. I think it's important to name that and say that, so thank you. But there's like something about that curiosity that needs to be really compassionate too. And so as a person who experiences systemic oppression and for other folks, I think one thing that's really helpful is to, before you share things that are personal or relevant to your lived experience, make sure that they are really safe to you, that they're things that you're comfortable sharing and being known, and that you've like processed, that maybe in the classroom isn't the first time that you're revealing or sharing or giving some insight and feedback into your lived experience of your identity. And just like continued compassion and acknowledgement from folks with privilege that something that is like abstract to you or relevant, you know, is like deeply traumatic to other folks, you know, and bringing that feels really important. And like some do's and don'ts too, like do a lot more learning outside of the classroom, and don't tokenize your classmates, you know, come with so much cultural humility, where you're not assuming. And thanks to Amber and to Adrian, you've shared some of those experiences of like suddenly becoming, having to represent a whole group that is not a monolith, that has like so much rich and beautiful variance, right? It puts a lot of pressure because we've all had unique experiences. So desire to learn from people who are willing and happy and ready to share, and maybe who are like being compensated or who are being supported, you know, rather than necessarily putting your fellow classmates on the spot and asking questions in large settings, even if it's on Zoom, you know, if that makes sense. Yeah. And something else that is coming up for me too is out of all of this, like white folks have been doing so much waking up. And I think for like, for myself, I won't speak generally, but like, you know, as a non-Black woman of color, I'm daughter of immigrants. My parents really, my mom, single mom, raised me to assimilate, you know, and fly under the radar and perform really well in like academic situations and professional situations. And because of my proximity to whiteness, that was easier for me than for my Black brothers and sisters, right? And so in this like awakening that I'm going through right now, there's been just this incredible growth in like cultural pride and identity too, which is really liberating and exciting too. So you can tell I'm getting a little emotional. So this is something that's not fully processed yet. It's like right in progress, but I'm feeling safe and vulnerable to share with you for the benefit of other students.
And Sophia, I appreciate, oh, Dr. Sutherland, were you going to say something? I'm sorry.
I wanted to say how much I did appreciate what Cameron and Adrian and Sophia was reflecting, and it made me think, especially as Adrian was talking about the opportunities that she's experienced at Richmont, for students to come together to try to make inroads into it, you know, in terms of what students could do or how they could respond. Being proactive on a student level to gather students for conversation rather than wait for somebody else to do it, to gather diverse students, gather students that look like you, whatever it would be. Do a book study, do a video study. And I think that curiosity that Sophia was talking about, when it's more than abstract and relevant, but it's becoming more real because of your proactive work to do it and to do something in your school with your peers, outside the classroom, things like that. I just would encourage students to do and think about those types of things. That's all.
And Dr. Southern, you actually like took those thoughts right out of my mind and you verbalized them very eloquently, literally. What I would add to that piece is lean into your identity as a student in this moment. Believe you me, I completely understand. You may be tired of being a student, but when you leave the experience of being a student, right, Miss Sophia, there's going to be some things that you're going to miss being a student. A big piece of that is the access that you have to a number of formal and informal resources that are around you. Lean into being a student. Lean into being a student in the counseling profession, where we're constantly asking you to reflect, grow, challenge, grow, be uncomfortable, be comfortable to be uncomfortable.
I wonder, Cameron spoke a little bit about his experience with faculty. And I guess the question I have is, as students, what are perspectives that you want faculty to have about your experiences in the classroom? What do you want faculty to know hinders your movement or promotes your engagement? Or, what do you want us to know?
I think one big thing is know that students are tired, right? There's so much fatigue, there's so much emotional work that's going on. And how, whatever that supporting that looks like to you, whether it's like kind of redesigning your courses a little bit for like, maybe weekly quizzes are not supporting growth right now. Maybe things need to be, if I may be so bold. And I say this too as someone who like straddles like having just graduated and now currently teaching and like having to balance those things. It feels so fresh being like a pandemic student. How tired we are amidst all of this. I think that's one very real thing. And also, I think centering the experiences, needs, and strengths of your BIPOC students in particular, your Black, Indigenous, and POC students, and your students with other socially oppressed identities, your queer and trans students, your gender nonconforming students, your disabled students, bringing their needs and strengths to the center of conversations, of assignments, of grading. And that doesn't necessarily mean putting those students on the spot, I think, but kind of really being responsive to what they're expressing and bringing fresh eyes to the way that you evaluate how they're showing up in your classes too, if that makes sense.
I think an awareness for if certain students in the class might be experiencing some microaggressions during the class, being mindful of that, maybe checking in on those students to see what their experience has been like. I think that happens in class more than we would like to admit. But those moments are really hard. And so I think an attentiveness to that, I think representation through material and text and, what's being shared. And I think something I want to know sometimes from my professors is how they're advocating outside of the classroom. I know we have these discussions, but as a professor, what are you out there doing as far as advocating, or how are you maybe educating yourself, just to hear from you in regard to that. Yeah, I think those are the things from me.
That's good. I'd like to echo all that and just say to you professors, you stand in such an incredibly important place. And I think that you guys are the bridges between information and transformation. And I think institutions of learning become obsolete when it is just about getting through the curriculum. And every student, Sophia said it so well. I mean, we all feel the pressure of just ticking the boxes and getting through and going, what kind of information do I need to spit back out to just get the grade that I need to get so I can be on with my life? But Dr. Sutherland, I would like to just commend you. Adrian and I had your class together actually last year, and I just thought you were the quintessential example of all that's been named here. I had you spring of 2020. So I was in your class when we all got the news of the pandemic, that we were all going online, we were all pivoting. And I thought you handled that situation just so beautifully, brilliantly, in taking how you changed the coursework and the curriculum, how you made space in the processing groups for us all to just have a place to connect. process. Several key things in the curriculum were changed, but in the classroom and once we moved online, I felt like one of your very unique gifts is to read the room and to take a moment and make that moment real for the students who are in there, and really bridge that gap between, hey, here's what good is knowledge if it doesn't change us, if it doesn't get in and transform us. That's why we're here, to learn and grow. And so I would just say to you professors, to see your role as integral, as being those people who can reach up into the ivory tower of information and really bring it down into the real world and lives of your students who are really hungry to grow and change.
Excellent responses. Thank you. Excellent responses. So I'm going to ask the attendees, if you have questions for the panel, you can begin by posting them in the chat area, and we will begin reviewing those. But we have one more question to the panel, and that question is this: what do you believe are helpful steps students can follow for having dialogues about race, culture, and racism? Once again, what do you believe are helpful steps students can follow for having dialogues about race, culture, and racism? And Mr. Cameron, let's start with you.
Yeah, I would say the thing of most importance is just to be doing your own personal work. And Adrian and Sophia have hit this beautifully. And I think it really applies to people who look like me and who have a very similar experience I have, to not put the burden on other people to be the bearers of information alone. How privileged is that, right? Oh, now I have a problem, I need you to solve it for me. But to first be about the work of really doing our own work. And then secondly, just coming, living with an awareness of just curiosity and respect and humility. I can't possibly understand that I know your experience. And I want to lean in with total curiosity and humility and a hunger to respect and deeply empathize with another person's experience.
I think we've touched on lots of things when it comes to having these conversations. One thing that comes up for me is thinking about, I think oftentimes we talk about safe spaces and safety in these conversations, which is absolutely true and is necessary. I also think about it in reframing the way that I engage in those conversations around being brave too, because some of these conversations aren't always safe. And it's not safe for everybody to have some of these conversations, but we can enter into brave spaces and putting ourselves in those, and recognizing what that space looks like, in mutual brave spaces of how we can enter in and have these conversations. And I think that y'all have touched on the idea of cultural humility, and humility entering into this space of saying, like, I know my experiences, and learning how to open our mind to multiple truths, right? That we can both be entering and experiencing the same thing, the pandemic, the Black Lives Matter movement, these things, right? Can all be having these same things and have totally different truths and experiences within that. And so entering into that space of being able to be brave and sharing and hearing and sitting in that space, because it's not always going to be safe. It's not always a safe space. And if we wait for it to be a perfectly safe space, then we aren't going to be able to have the kinds of dialogues that we need to actually move move ourselves forward, to move yourself and your colleagues forward, and both our own, no matter what your experience is, whether you're the person who's the oppressed or the oppressor or whatever, it doesn't matter. We all have to kind of step into that space, and being brave and engaging in that dialogue so that we can expand and integrate multiple ways of being, multiple truths into how we understand the conversation, how we understand the topic. And so I think that's the thing that I've been coming to this year, is kind of reframing from wanting it to be totally safe, because it's not always going to be 100% safe, right? It's just not going to be. And if I'm waiting for that, I'm missing out, and others are missing out. We're missing out on this opportunity for actual growth and actual diving into conversation. So what does that mean? What does it mean for us to come to some mutuality in stepping into bravery?
I love that. And at the same time, be okay choosing the times when you want to be brave, and being okay with saying, I need to protect myself right now. I'm not in a space to be brave and manage the potential fallout from being brave. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is 100%. And on that too, that, you don't, particularly as marginalized folks, we often, whether it's explicit or implicit, there's always a sense of feeling like we have to do that. And I also want to give that freedom, particularly to students, that you don't have to do anything. It isn't your job to do that. And how I come to it and how I talk about it often is that if you feel like I need to say this because I'm not part of this conversation, if I don't say something, then say something. But if you are feeling pulled to have to say something because there's some sort of expectation, implicit or explicit, then that's not your job. It isn't your job if it's feeling like you're being pressured or pushed or expected to do something. But if you're feeling like I'm not able to engage in this conversation, I'm not being represented here without me putting this on the table, then allow yourself to be brave and put that out there in the space so that you can enter in and be part of that conversation.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with Dr. Nelson so much of that transformation happens when we approach our growth edge. And so that courage is really important. And yes, Dr. Sutherland, your wisdom, and in particular for students with oppressed identities, of choosing when and when not to be brave. And we know in counselor education that so much of our intrapsychic and interpersonal development happens when we get feedback. So if you're feeling safe and in moments in the classroom, in conversations, using I statements and sharing your own personal experience of how other people's words and actions and behaviors are directly impacting you is a really good learning opportunity. And I think that, so it kind of, there needs to be some building up some hardiness to receiving feedback. We get used to that in our training anyway, as we're being observed constantly in our early years. And then also some really skillful training in providing that feedback too. How can we, And one more thought to the point of, especially the students with oppressed identities, choosing when and when not to engage. For faculty to, that 10%, oh, forgive me, my dog Rocket is really excited about this conversation. But that 10% of the participation part of our grade, and understanding when students of color and students with oppressed identities are not chiming in, it doesn't mean they're not engaged or, participating. It means they're doing some self-protection. And so a reminder to students too, that you don't always have to be so active, right? That your existence is resistance. You being in these predominantly white institutions itself is transformative.
I want to speak to this real quick too before we do Q&A. I think participating in Dr. Sutherland's social and cultural groups has really made me spend some time reflecting on this question. And I think, you know, right off the bat, compassion, empathy, teachability are like really important when navigating those conversations. I also have realized, and Dr. Sutherland, you gave us this tool in your class, but using some type of like a cultural identity model, racial identity model, and understanding that everyone is on their own journey and might be in different places on a continuum as far as what they know, where they're at, you know, just how they're confronting these topics is important too, because everyone's not where you're at in the conversation. So I think accepting that, and then also just, I'm a person that doesn't love conflict, and I'm growing to understand how beautiful it actually can be and transformative. And just like anticipating discomfort. I think I talked to a lot of friends who just like don't want to be uncomfortable. You know, this is going to be hard. I don't know how I feel. Yeah, it is really hard. Allyship is hard. There's sacrifice. There's going to be moments where you screw up. Like, I think having some acceptance around that when entering into it can be valuable. So those are kind of just the points that I think are good for navigating those conversations and that dialogue.
Very much so. And it's,
Sean, Dr. Smith, can I just add one last thing?
sure.
Adrian, you added something that I was about to say just before you came in, and that was that piece about recognizing that people's journeys are very different, and for us to be accepting of where people are in both their racial and cultural identity development, and accepting that, and not wanting folks to be where we want them to be, but to be willing to join them where they are. We say that, you know, like we learn that as counselors in training, but also as counselors, but also that piece of acknowledging that that journey is not a pleasant journey, period. This conversation, engaging and developing and growing and talking about this, you know, like we have seen just in 2020, this conversation has been a growth spurt for us as a nation. And it's been a good growth spurt for some, and it's been a painful growth spurt for others, but it's been a growth spurt, and it's been a necessary growth spurt. And so to be willing to step in is the first step, but knowing that some people are going to step in with just the smallest part of their toes, and some people are going to be willing to dive in, you know, and say, yes, let's get, but that we can't stand in judgment of where folks are willing to step in, but to be willing to stand with those, and to do that with a sense of acceptance and wisdom, wherever we are in the classroom, outside of the classroom, to do it with a sense of acceptance in that journey. So that's all I wanted to say.
I wanted to just add really quickly just to turn the conversation just a slight bit, because one, I want to add in a couple of words that one of our attendees did in her comment, accepting versus understanding versus respecting, right? And so while we want to make sure that we respect where people are in their journey, and then understand how that then explains how they play out and how they show up, accepting could be a little bit different, because this accepting could say, okay, I accept it, okay, that's okay, versus I understand it, I respect it, but I don't accept that that's where you need to stay, type of thing, right? So And I know that Dr. Macklin, that's exactly what you meant. I know that's what you meant, but I think it's good for people to hear just that difference. The other thing really quickly is I want to speak to our white students because, you know, some of this plays into the question that they will have around, so how do I how do I sit in this conversation? How do I not take up space? Am I right? But how do I not shut myself out of the conversation? Right? It's a dance. And so as much as we understand that white folk bear the burden of helping to move social justice forward, we also want to, as people of color, understand that as white people present in these conversations, one-on-one or in groups, we too have to get an understanding of where they are and how their journey is playing out. And I think there are different feelings among people of color about that. But I do think that that's important to think about, that we want our work peers to grow and to move forward, and we want to give them space to do that at the same time. So just another perspective.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So we have a number of different questions that have been posted in the chat and in the question area. I'm going to take a stab at a few, and I'm going to begin with a question from attendee that identifies as Daryl. And Daryl speaks specifically for the students on the panel. What do you wish faculty would do in the moment and afterwards in a class when microaggressions or insensitive comments or attitudes come from a well-intentioned but somewhat blind, unaware majority students?
This is a hard question for me because I feel like what I maybe want in that moment versus what might be a wise decision, especially for a faculty during a moment like that, probably differ to some degree. I think part of me would love for it to be addressed in the moment. I don't know how helpful that would be or what that could possibly lead to. So I don't want to say that that's like my only answer. I think I just want to be acknowledged that I'm in that space and that they know and are able to even maybe address with me after class what had just occurred, and almost like a check-in. Because it's one thing to like absorb a microaggression on your own. Like I do that through my day-to-day, but when someone pauses and understands that I just had that experience and is willing to check on me, like that makes me emotional. Like even just thinking about that act of like love would be healing and powerful. So that's kind of my reflections on that. It's a hard question.
Thank you, Ms. Adrian.
Yeah, that feeling seen and cared for, and yeah, is really important, especially from your faculty that you look to for support and to hold the space. I'm inclined to also want things like microaggressions to be addressed in the moment or close to in the moment, because we also look to our faculty, you know, Cameron, you said it so nicely that it's not just about information, it's about transformation too, right? So we look to our faculty to also model for us all of those core conditions and, you know, to show us how to attend to process and not just content. And so if our faculty are comfortable calmly, or even it's okay to be human and not be so calm and to, you know, experience emotion and convey it too in the moment, right? But I think it's really powerful as a model to show us as students, how can we in a therapeutic way address microaggression? So like naming it and acknowledging it and using it as a teaching moment. Maybe it doesn't have to be turning the whole attention of the class to the student who experiences it as a microaggression. That doesn't sound comfortable or safe or wanted, right? But bringing it back to the student who made the microaggression, and maybe, you know, wondering, like, look at our multicultural and social justice counseling competencies. Where are they lagging in their development? Is it like is there room for more knowledge or skills, or where can we, you know, provide a little bit of teaching and growth there?
Yes, I would agree with Sophia. Well aware, as you were saying, Dr. Macklin, that I am on my journey, and I certainly can't speak for all white males who are pursuing a master's degree. But I tend to be at a place on my journey of wanting to jump in with both feet and experience the uncomfortable, and I learn best by contextual learning, real-time examples. So I am hungry, and I recognize that's a tall order to place on professors. But yet I think in this day and age, it's just a necessary skill that professors need to grow in, of being able to steward that moment with dignity on both sides. Because certainly the person who is issuing the microaggression needs to be treated with compassion as well. They're on their journey. But I just think it's such an important moment to be able to model for the classroom and for the students. So I know it's a tall order, and I certainly understand why professors would have to make real-time decisions and discernment of saying, I need to let that pass. And certainly you have more information than the average student in the room does at the moment too. So I respect that. But I do think it's an important thing in this day and age for students to see professors model that and create it into a learning experience. To say, hey, every time, you know, it doesn't have to be, you know, like you were saying, Adrienne, conflict can actually be a great place for deeper connection if we steward it well. It doesn't always have to end in a bomb. It can actually be a balm of healing. And in some ways, I think you professors are not just professors. You stand in the place of healers as well. And back to that earlier question, I want to see professors in institutions of learning really leaning into those identities.
And guess what? Faculty on the panel, they didn't leave you out of this question either.
You know, I was sitting and I'm just like, oh my gosh. This is just, it's really, it's like, this is such a growth process for me as a faculty member, you know, as this person who is really in this growth. And that's the thing for me that I always have to realize and recognize. And I love what Cameron said, and I think it was, I can't remember if it was Adrienne or Sophia, but there's this place of modeling that happens in the classroom for faculty with students. And I'm always aware of that, that there is this responsibility. And you know, when things like that happen, and they do happen in the classroom, and there's this immediate knee-jerk reaction that I want to have. And then I have to rein it in and say, okay, how do I help both the wounded and the one who's done the wounding? How do I help the growth process for that person who's been injured and that person who's done the injuring without embarrassing either, without putting either on the spot. And so making it a learning moment for everybody in the room, and not calling out because if it's a microaggression that's directed at maybe a person of color, let's say even, like a Black person. I'm that Black person that's in that room, and that could be me. And so I have to think about the students who are in the room that it could be affecting. And so I have to, for me, I feel like it needs to be addressed in a way that is sensitive enough for all to learn, for all to grow. And in that moment, not so much to single out anybody, but for all to feel respected, for all to feel that it's a growth moment. And also to know that I'm not wanting to diss anybody. I'm not wanting anybody to leave the room like they're shamed, like they need to have their head bowed down. And I will also, if I feel the need to go to a person that I feel may have still be feeling a bit more, that there still needs to be some building up, that I will reach out. I still will reach out to that person or persons just to check in, just to see how they're doing after the engagement in the room. Even if it's the person who did the wounding, to check in to see how my reaction, how my response rather, may have impacted, may have landed. So there is a part for me that initially I have to admit that I have to deal with before I even can speak. So there's that realness of me as a person that's in the room that's dealing with that microaggression too. So.
And I'll just say really quickly, I completely agree. And I'm still new faculty, so figuring out and navigating that space in real time is a journey. And particularly when I'm teaching classes specifically on topics of having these conversations. So it fosters those comments and interactions a lot more than in a typical class. And I think the thing that I say to my students all the time is I'm me, 100% me. When I'm in your classroom, when I'm outside of my classroom, I want to be human with my students, because I think in academia, too often we try to present as this colonized version of what professional is, and it's so disconnected. And there's such a huge power differential between professor and student that then we're just portraying this idealized, perfect version of what it means to be a professional. And it's unattainable and it's not sustainable. And so I let them see me at my best. And, sometimes I'm scattered. Sometimes I'm like, I could hold these things from you. I could put the front up. I could not share these things with you. But I'm choosing to do this because it's important for you to be able to see that I might not have all my ducks in a row, or this thing might have fallen apart. Does not mean that I'm not professional. Does not mean that I'm not good at what I do. Does not mean that we can't still do this work. And in that same vein, that when things come up, I also try to remove it from it being a student or identifying students in the room, but just trying to be reflective of, when you said that, this is how it impacted. This is what came up for me. This is what came up for me. And I wonder if there's others that, not that anybody has to identify, but I wonder if other people experience something like that, or somebody else that had a different experience might feel that sense too. And I wonder if we can talk about that and use it as a platform again to kind of gently bring awareness to what just happened. Because I think, again, we're modeling and also raising awareness that oftentimes microaggressions are unintentional and coming from a place of just not recognizing or knowing that thing that was said, or that belief or anything, not for everybody, not always, but that oftentimes, particularly in these situations, it's unintentional. And so me being able to say, you know, I hear where you're coming from. And this is also how, when you say that, this is what comes up for me. This is my perspective on this, and to kind of take it on me and use me as the person, the real person in the room, rather, and allowing it to be a learning moment, but not necessarily taking it to a directly academic place, but taking it to a visceral human experience place, and allowing me to be the vehicle or the vessel for that, so that it doesn't put that burden on my students.
I think one thing to realize too is that as Black women, we are speaking from a space of being Black women, and there's a level of sensitivity that we have in the room when those things occur. And so for other faculty that may not have that level of sensitivity, doing your own work, we're going back to that same thing again, doing your own work increases the possibility that you will recognize when those things happen in your classroom and have a visceral reaction around it, right? So it's a difficult thing, but being able to recognize that we may not have that sensitivity is going to be important. And if you want a different classroom experience around these types of things and to be supportive of your BIPOC students, it will require you to do a level of work on your own outside of your job to get to a space where you could actually do that.
In this, in addition to what's already been shared, this is, I'm not going to say a loaded question, it is a complex question. Because I'm one that thinks in systems, in organizations, in policy and practice. And this is a great example, and what we're talking about is a micro level, if you think about it. As faculty, as a program, as a profession, we should be able to step back and think, are we doing this effectively throughout program? Why should this only happen in the multicultural class? We should be having these dialogues and discussions in each one of our courses. And when they do, how shall we respond? So when we're talking about modeling, and we're talking about systems, and we're talking about creating spaces to have those dialogues, there's that system level too that students, you may not be aware of, all right? You may not be aware of what's happening from a systems perspective, all right? This dialogue is happening on our accrediting bodies, all right, at that level, okay? We all know that, quote unquote, the multicultural counseling class was not meant to be one class, be done, move on, all right? We know, just like ethics, just like our other classes, they are supposed to be integrated throughout the curriculum in our work. So it just doesn't stop there. It's a nice building block. It's a nice building block to start the process, but ongoing dialogue, and as a program and as a faculty, how are we doing that? How are we doing that? We want to thank each and every one of you that has attended and participated in today's event. I want to thank each one of the panel members for your contribution, your insight, and insights to our topic today. Do know that Dr. Sutherland has the contact information for the panels if you want to reach out to them, to us. We'd be glad to share that, and know that this video will be available also to those that attended and want to access this information. Let's continue to be supportive of each other as we move forward and present our humanity in all that we do, as we continue to work towards social justice on all levels for all people and all individuals. Have a great Wednesday. Have a great rest of the week. Take care.